Joining me now live, Liberal Senator Sen Fierravanti-Wells. Thanks for your time. You crossed the floor on this vote to have an inquiry into Australia-China relationship. Why did you do this? What is the government not doing that it should?
Well, Tom, good morning. As a matter of principle, I supported Senator Patrick's motion to refer a reference and inquiry to the Senate Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee. It is very clear that post-Wuhan coronavirus, it cannot be business as usual with the communist regime in Beijing. I think that at this point in time, it is appropriate and timely. I have been a long-standing critic. I have been long-standing in my criticisms of the communist regime in China, and consistent with that view, I thought it was appropriate for me to support this motion. I mean, let's not forget, Tom, that just this morning, the President of the Senate is celebrating 50 years of the committee and the establishment of the committee system here in our Senate, and he lauded the work that has been done over 50 years. And so therefore, as the primary chamber, as he indicated, and given the success of our committee system, I think that it's more than appropriate for us to look at this relationship and into the future.
Anything that this committee, though, would talk about in terms of the relationship or decide would be headlines, would be big headlines, and could further inflame the relationship. I mean, you do concede the traditional avenue is for the government to handle this type of, let's be honest, diplomacy.
Well, Tom, that's a matter for the government. We are a Senate, and accordingly, our Senate has, from time to time, over 50 years, undertaken controversial inquiries. And so, therefore, it's appropriate for us to look into this issue as it is for us to look into a whole range of other issues. But Tom, can I come back to the point? It cannot be business as usual post-Wuhan virus, and I have been very strong on that. I've called for us to decouple from China to reduce our dependency on the communist regime. I've even looked at looking at potential compensation and some plan. The reality is we need a plan to move forward here. And whether it's in the area of foreign investment, in very different areas. I mean, let's not forget that the activities of the communist regime in Australia has been insidious at times, and one only has to look at what Alex Joske just released a couple of days ago, the ASPI paper, which looks at the activities of the communist regime in Australia. So I think Australians do expect that post-virus the situation does change, and I think it's important for us to examine the whole gamut of this relationship.
So just on the trade element, though, when you say decouple, China's obviously going to be a customer, if you like, of Australia. They buy a lot of what we sell, even if you just look at iron ore. Are you saying to reduce artificially, to enforce a reduction of the percentage of our trade, for example, with China? Because the government says, well, we do our bit, we open up free trade agreements and avenues, and then eventually, if China's an unreliable partner, these producers will shift partners. Are you saying this needs to be the force of hand from government to reduce the amount of trade we do with China?
Tom, it is not a good business model to put a third of your trade eggs in one basket. A third of our exports are now with the communist regime. 26.4% of our two-way trade is with China. What we have seen during the pandemic is the need for our economy to reduce its dependency on overseas supply chains, and that of course includes our dependency on the trade relationship with China. I think it's important for us to diversify. I mean, when you look at, Tom, the things that we import from China, everyday household items, and there is now a legitimate question as to whether some of those items ought not to be made in Australia. There will be, no doubt, a push for a made in Australia framework, and we have seen comments from the government in relation to to that, and I support that. But the reality is, Tom,
Right.
it is not a good business model. But having said that, let's not forget that what we do export to China, particularly iron ore and coal, is vitally important to the economic growth of China,
Right.
and in addition
just-
to feeding its 1.3 billion people.
Yeah, no, of course. China trades with us
So
because
therefore,
it benefits them. We know that.
I have no
I just want to ask you
doubts.
finally. Yeah, so we're nearly out of time, Senator. Can I just ask you finally one other sector, the university sector, because you spoke about, government assistance might be needed. It's going to be pretty hard for this sector to find the same number of international students, even over a few years. What's the solution there?
Well, for a start, the university sector ought to take heed of what's being taught in their own business schools, which is you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And so therefore, I think this is an opportunity for the university sector and for those universities that have diversified. International students are important, but so is diversification of the source of those students, and we've seen some successes around Australia. The problem has come here for those universities that have pretty much saw the rivers of gold with Chinese students and predominantly Chinese students, and so now the avenues for those universities have to be diversified.
All right. Well, it's another interesting contribution, of course, from the Senate. We appreciate your time today, Sen Fierravanti-Wells.
Thanks, Tom.